Today I'm going to talk about Nebosh Safety Element 7 IGC 2. In Element 7, I'm going to talk about chemical and biological health hazard and risk control. When we are talking about the hazardous substance form, right, we are first talking about the classification and health risks in chemical and biological health hazard. First of all, we're looking at the classification. We have solid. Number one, we have solid. A solid block of material. Example, like a lead is a solid, right? Lead. Then we're talking about dust. Also, dust is a chemical. Very small liquid particle normally created by a gliding or polishing or milling, blasting, etc. A cable of becoming an airborne, right? It can also become an airborne, like a flour dust, and also like a rock or rusting dust, right? Then number 3, we talk about fume. What is a fume? A fume is a very small metabolic particle that have the condense from the gaseous state during the work with a molten materials welding to create a airborne cloud, right? So flame is also a chemical. Then number 4, gas. Gas also a chemical. A basic state of matter expand to fill the space available, like carbon dioxide also is a CO2, is a chemical also. Then moist, a very small liquid droplets suspended in the air, normally created by spray, right? So also it's like a spray, some certain droplets in the air that can affect, same like corona, the spreading of coronas of airborne disease also. Then vapor also. Vapor is the gaseous form of a substance that exists as a solid or a liquid, normal temperature and pressure. Vapor gives off by a acetone solvent, right? So simple vapor also, if you are cooking items, right, this gas that come up due to heat or cold, right, or distillation process, also it's called also vapor, right, is through the air also vapor. Then we're talking about liquid also. Liquid is a basic state of matter freely flow fluid, right, like water at 20 degree also is liquid, right? Talking about the form of biological agents. Form of biological agents, right? Biological agents, you have like fungi, right? Fungi is a biological agent. Fungi, bacterial, virus, right? So 3. When we're talking about fungi is a dry rot in a building or in human being, right? Fungi. Then also talking about bacterial also. Bacteria is Legionella or Anthrax or Brucellosis, right? It's also bacterial. Then we're talking about virus. Virus can either be like HIV, hepatitis, and Wally disease, right? So these are also called virus, right? So the form of biological agents, you have fungi, you have bacteria, and you have virus. Then hazardous substance, you have solid, you have dusty item, you have flume, you have gas, you have moist, you have vapor, and you have liquid, right? Then biological agents also, you have fungi, bacterial, and virus. Then now we are talking about classifications of chemical hazardous to health. That now we are going to talk about things, chemical that are dangerous. Hazardous means dangerous to human health or to environment. So we are talking about, I think, six or eight of them which are dangerous to human health. We're talking about toxic, right? Toxic is a small dose caused by death or serious ill health when inhaling or swelling or absorb via the skins, like potassium, cyanide, right? So this, when you inhale this toxic substance or chemical, it can affect the system. Then we're talking about number 2 is harmful. Harmful cause death and serious illness when inhaling, swelling or absorb via the skin is large dose, right? So harmful also a classification. Then we're talking about number 3 is corrosive, right? Corrosive also, it destroys the living tissues if you contact with it. For example, you have concentrated sodium hydroxide, right? This sodium hydroxide, right? So this also is like a salty chemical also. It can affect the system also. Then you're talking about irritant. Irritant also can cause inflammation of the skin or the mucous membrane, right? Example, in the eyes, lungs, through the immediate or prolonged or repeating contact, like the ozone, that is O3, right? So these are chemical also, right? Then you're talking about carcinogenic, right? May also cause cancer, like example, abnormal growth of cells in the body, right? When inhaling or swelling or absorb via in the skin. Yeah, example, asbestos, right? This is carcinogen, right? It can cause cancer also. Then we're talking about another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're talking about sensitizing agents, right? Sensitizing agents, right? This is capable of producing an allergy reaction that will gradually worsen on repeated exposure, right? So these also are agents. If you are exposed to this certain chemical also, it will keep on repeating and your body will get swelling also. Then 7, we're talking about mutagen. What is mutagen? It may causes genetical mutation, right? That can be inherited, right? So then we're talking about 7, 8. It's toxic to production, right? Toxic to production may causes sterilities or affecting an unborn child, right? Then all of these infections are categorized into 2 parts. You have the acute and the chronic infects. So when we're talking about the acute infect, acute simply means that health infects arise where the quality or the quantity of the toxic or harmful substance absorbed into the body produce a harmful effect very quickly. That is acute. When they say you are acute or you contaminated with some certain substance, so it's either it become acute or chronic. But acute is the first stage, right? So the acute simply means health effects arise where the quantity of the toxic or harmful substance absorbed into the body and produce harmful effects very quickly, right? Like if you have toxic system, something toxify your system, it starts producing another cells that will affect the body or start spreading around, right? Then we're talking about chronic health. Chronic is health effects described as a condition where the harmful effects of a substance absorbed into the body taking a very long time to appear, monthly or perhaps year, right? Then we're talking about Another one, we're talking about the assessment of health risks in chronic biological or chronic infect. We're talking about assessment of health risks, how we can assess the health risks. First of all, we're talking about routes of entry into the body. What are the ways by which this substance can enter your body? First of all, we're talking about number one is through inhalation, right? Inhalation. Inhalation entry is through the nose or the mouth and along the respiratory passage to the lungs. The lung is the most vulnerable part of the body as it can readily absorb this gas or phlegm or soluble dust or moist or vapor. This is the main means of entry of biological agents. So this simply means that you can inhale these things, these chemicals. There is the ways by which you can absorb this biological chemical into your system by inhaling or breathing, right? Or maybe some people breathe through their mouth also, right? It's through vapor if you are congested in certain place. So these are the means by which this chemical can enter into someone's body by inhaling also. Then you're talking about ingestion. Ingestion simply means that it can enter in the body by the mouth along with the whole length of the gastrointestinal, right, tract through the stomach and also the intestine. This contamination may occur as a result of swelling agents directly from eating or drinking contaminated food or from eating with a contaminated finger. All forms of chemical may be ingested, and also some biological agents may also find their way into the body by this route, right? So this simply means by ingestion, chemical can also enter your stomach. Sometimes the food that you eat, so that's why we have contamination of food, contamination of water, pollution of water. Same like now this spilling. Let's say for example a company is mining some certain toxic substance. Then this toxic substance, after the mining company finish, this toxic substance, the remaining, they go and throw in certain water, in certain river. So this certain river will be polluted. Sometimes people drink this water, it can be affected to their system also. So this is categorically is an example of ingestion, right? Then the food that we are eating, right? So if you have uncooked food, then you have cooked food, you save them together, let's say like a raw meat, right? This meat is full of bacteria. They have a food that is closer it. Then because of they are closer together, not stored properly, then you happen to eat that food also. If the food is also already contaminated, then it can affect the system also, right? Then in the assessment of health risks also, I finished talk about inhalation, then ingestion, then now is absorption, right? What is absorption? Is entry is through the skin or the eye, through direct contact, and also through contact with contaminated face on a cloth, right? So also this is through like cloth, somebody sweats and other things, you understand, like those skin things, right? So don't do good to exchange cloth it also, right? Then we're talking about injection also. Injection is the entry is directly into the body by high pressure equipment or contamination sharp object piercing to the skin. So injection simply means that nails or this injection that they use, because if this injection is contaminated, they use on one person or two person also, it can be affected. If somebody have some certain illness in him, right, or in him or her, so you also can be affected by that same because of the pollution of this needle. Then also this needle, maybe let's say like this needles, maybe it's rusting also because of this rusting also, it can affect someone, and someone can have tetanus in the system also, right? Then another one is also called aspiration, right? What is aspiration also? It's a process whereby the liquid or the solid go directly into the lungs other than by inhalation, right? So it goes directly to the lungs. This is aspiration. It's called aspiration. So there are four road that this substance can enter someone's body, right? It's by inhalation, by ingestion, and by absorption, and by injection, and also by aspiration, right? So I'm going to talk about defense mechanism. What are the defense mechanism, right? Solution. We're talking about number one, the defense. We are talking about respiratory defense, right? The respiratory system is protected by the following defense, like sneezing reflex when you sneeze, then filtration in the nasal cavity, very effective at removing large particle, then a calorie escalator, small ear lining, the bronchi and the trachea, and also the guidance moves, muscular line. This passage out of the lungs effectively at removal of all particles larger than 7 microns in diameter. Then micropage, right, with blood cells, and destroy the particle that long in the alveoli, right, where there is no cilia to extract them. Inflammatory response causes the wall of the alveoli to thicker and become a fibrous. May be temporarily or may result into permanent scarring, right, as a silicosis, right? Skin defense. What are skin defense here? Skin defense is a thick layer of a dead cell at a surface of the epidermis that is constantly replenished as they wear off, right? Then scuba, an oily fluid secreted onto the surface of the skin that has bacterial properties. When damaged, the skin shows an inflammatory or response with inflammation and swelling and redness and white blood cell collecting the site of danger of fibrous or cross connection form and scar tissue may result, right? Then we're talking about sources of information. Sources of information. First, I've talked about defense mechanism for these biological agents like the respiratory system and the skin, how the skin can react to these things, and how your respiratory or inhale system also can withstand this chemical also for it not to enter your body. Now we're talking about the sources of information. Product label, right? You check at the product label. Supplier of substance and proportional must inform user of the name of the substance. Example, in the case of preparation or the hazardous constituent, and the indication, the level of danger by means of the symbols on the label. So this simply means that the sources, they should put every chemical that they use to make some certain creams, to make some certain food items, so people will know that if these things are allergic to their system. Then we're talking about point 2 is guidance documents. Occupational exposure limits are the limits on the airborne concentration of substance that employee can be exposed to. They will be covered in more details later in this element. Expose the limits vary from one country to another, often have different title, right? So guidance document. In the UK, workplace expose the limits and published by the Health and Safety Executive, that is the HSE, in guidance notes, right? Then in the US, the Townsend and limits value are published by the American Conference of the Government Industrial Hygienists, right? In the European Union, EU, the indicative limits value published by the European Commission, right? So in UK, it was published by the Health and Safety. Then in the US, it's published by the American Conference of Government Industrial Hygienists. Then in EU, European Union, it was published by the European Commission. So these are sources of information. Under the Guardian documents is where you have UK, you have America, their documents, right? Then for products label, you're talking about the supply substance. People should put the substance that they make this chemical from, or these creams or food items should put the chemicals there, right? Then we're talking about manufacturer safety data sheets. This also, the sources of information should have manufacturing safety data sheets. Manufacturing safety data sheets and supplier of hazardous substance must provide sufficient information about the toxic effect and the explosion limits of the chemical to enable make user to take appropriate safety precaution in the workplace in terms of using and transport and disposal, how they can transport this one, the safety and the disposal, so they will know everything. Then safety data sheet also label only provide general information about the products that does not allow the localist condition which might affect the risks. Right? So these are advantage. Then we're talking about the limitation of information available. And this limitation of information available contain general statements of hazard and does not allow for the localized condition in which the substance are to be used. Then can also be highly technical and meaningless to the non-specialist. Then does not allow for various individual or susceptibility or to substance. Then provide information about the specific substance and the preparation in isolation, and does not take into account the effect of mixed explosion, right? Then represents the current or scientific thinking, and there may be hazard present that are not currently understood. Right? This is all self-explanatory. Then we're talking about the role of hazardous or dangerous substance monitoring. How we can monitor this one. Hazardous substance monitoring involves taking a sample of the air from the workplace, often from the immediate and around a work breathing zone, and then measure the amount of hazardous substance in the sample so that the worker are not exposed to hazardous substance and can be estimated. This estimated can then be sued to compare a worker actual exposure to a relevant working exposure limit, right? So this simply means that whenever someone is working in a highly toxic areas, they should have a thermometer, or they should have something that can test the air, can test the exposure, right? Like radiation. That so they should have this equipment which can test the limits of which you are exposed to certain toxic material. It depends on which area. Like for X-ray, you have the X-ray testing machine to test the radiation that you are receiving. Then for oil company also toxic, they have the electronics device that they are using, which used to check the toxicity, right? Then another point of the role of hazardous substance, we're talking about limitation of hazardous substance monitor. What are the limitations of hazardous substance monitor? We have the accuracy of the results. It should have accuracy of results. How many toxicity in the air? Then the variations in personal explosion, how long you exposed to this one. They're talking about the absence of standard, right? Then other explosion routes, right? Then I'm going to talk about occupational exposure. What is occupational exposure? Exposure also means that you are exposed to certain danger, you are exposed to radiation, you are exposed to toxic. So exposure means like you are exposed to something, you know. Then exposure, occupational exposure limits, that is OELS, a minimized concentration of airborne contaminated, normally measured across a particular reference period time to which employee may be exposed, usually by inhalation. So this simply means that if you are working in a place where it's very toxic, you should have a testing machine, right? So you should have a specific time that you are going to work, that you are exposed at this particular time. You should not be exceeded the time, because it will infects you, because every minute it has a dose, right? So if you are working in an oil company or in a lab, so you are exposed to all of these things. So you should have a testing machine. You should have a particular time that you're supposed to work there, rather than staying in that confinement or in that lab for a very long time, right? So this is what the occupational exposure limit is talking about, the OELS, right? So in the OELS, unfortunately, there are no harmonized global standardized for OELS. OELS is occupational exposure limit, and the term used to describe them vary between countries to country. Definition vary, method for calculation exposure vary, and the legal status of this is limits. That is, legislation also is limits, right? Sometimes you're talking about the insurance, you know. Then it is therefore important to select the correct OEL for the country you are working in, and use the correct code of practice in interpret. However, the intention of the OL, that the occupational exposure limit, is similarly to put the ceiling in place so that employee will not be exposed to high concentration of airborne substance, toxic, either for a short duration of time or for a long period of working days, wherein scientific evidence suggests that this will cause a risk to health, that the exposure, if you're exposed to certain radiation or chemical or toxic. Long-term or short-term exposure limits, right? Then you have short-term exposure limits. What is long-term exposure limits? The level of airborne contamination allowable over a 8 hours period used for a substance produce chronic infect. Then short-term exposure, level of airborne contamination allowed over 15 minutes period used for substance produce acute infect. So the long term you have 8 hours, then the short term you have 15 minutes. It depends on the toxicity. Then significance of the significance of time weight average. A worker can be exposed to different level of inhalation, that is inhaling, of hazardous, dangerous substance through the working days. In many cases, it will not be practically to measure an individual exposure for all the working period. A time weight average is equally to the sum of the parts of each time period, which is multiplied by the exposure level of the contamination that the person contaminates this toxic in that time or period. It is then divided by the hours in the working place, right? Usually 8 hours, and the level of indicating as the time weight average. This can be significant wherein the concentration of the chemical change through the day or the time exposure vary. What is limitation limitation of exposure limits? That is the OELS. the OALS provide a general basis on which to assess what may be a safe level of concentration of airborne contamination, but take no account of individual susceptibility or synergistic effects of mixture of substance, and does not provide a definition between the safe and the dangerous condition. So limitation simply means that it doesn't consider how much this person is being exposed to this danger and the time is mixing this equipment, this substance. So all those things need to take into consideration, right? Then another point talking about comparison of international standard. So when you comparing this international into international standard, different measures are applied in different regions of the world, right? In the US alone, several different groups recommend what occupational exposure limits that the OELS should be. The safer level of exposure set out vary due to different measure, period, different measures, criteria, equipment use, different experts, airborne concentration, and various other criteria determine the toxicity of the substance. So to conceptualize all this one is talking about how you are exposed to danger, you are exposed to heat, the toxicity. If you are working in certain facilities, there are labs or oil investments or radiation, they should have a tester, right? So the more you expose, there should be rules and regulations which govern you and according to your insurance policies, right? So these are talking about the high tox, how many hours you're supposed to stay in working in toxic place, right? Then I'm going to talk about the control measures. So when we're talking about control measures of this occupational exposure limits, we're talking about prevention of exposure. How preventing exposure to hazardous substance is the most effective way to control the health risks that they represent. Where exposure can be prevented, then it should be adequate control. So how we can control it? Compliance with occupational exposure limits, right? In many countries, the relevant OELS have legal status, and any breach of this limit might result in enforcement action or be treated as a criminal offense, right? Where these limits value have no legal status but represent good practice, it is still important to avoid the overexplosion. So in this context, in control measure, it's talking about compliance with occupational exposure limit. That government should have the rules and regulation, how many hours you're supposed to work in this exposed area, in this toxic area, and they should have their insurance, right? Because in terms of health issue, insurance is also help them to manage their health because they are exposed to danger. Also, you should try to stay limited time to stay in these laboratories or this where there's an exposure, right? Then we're talking about principle of good practice. The following principle of good practice exists with guiding and control of exposure to this hazardous substance, to the bad substance. You should follow this good practice. You should try to follow this good practice. I'm going to highlight about eight. But number one, you have to minimize of emotional and release and spreading. You have to minimize that one, right? Then accounts for relevant routes of entry, right? Then exposure, number three, exposure control, which is proportional to the health risks. You have to look at that. Then the effectiveness and reliability of control option that minimize the escape and the spreading of hazardous substance, right? So you have to check where this hazardous substance can spread, right? Then also number 5, you have to use of personal protective elements, right? That is the masks, the gas, the breathing, those elements, gears, right? You have to put all those things on to protect yourself or to protect the people that are working there. Then number 6, also regularly check and review of control measures that are placed to ensure that they remain effective. So regularly check and review which control measures they have. Close the door or what. They have the control measures in every toxic place that people are working. Then also we're talking about 7, the provisions of information and training. People have to be trained when you are working in a toxic area, place that deal with gas or oil or radiation. They have to be trained them how you can endure, what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do, how many hours you're supposed to stay inside. It's the awareness, right? Then point number 9 is to ensure that the control measure or the implementation do not increase the over risks to the health safety. So you need to check all the time your health status, right? So if you see that you have a large amount of dose, you have to take a treatment first before continue the work, right? Then I'm going to talk about common measure used to implement the principle of good practice in occupational exposure limits, right? How you are exposed to this toxic, the common measures, right? Only a risk assessment will determine the precautions necessary to control the chemical and the biological hazard. Analysis and critical evaluation of this information will be suggested that the best cause of this action, number 1, is to eliminate or substitute the hazard by using a less dangerous agent. Number 2, by changing the process, like vacuum instead of brushing. Use vacuum to collect the waste or this chemical also. So if you brushing, it can evaporate in the air and someone can inhale it also. Then also number 4 is using physical or engineering control to reduce the risks at source or providing general protection like segregation and enclosement and ventilation. So this simply means that you have to ventilate where you are working. There is toxic, you have to ventilate, you have to segregate one items from another, right? From one office to another, right? Then we're talking about 5, you have to manage the tasks of the person by doing this design and provide, right? And personal protective elements, right? They have to use this personal protective equipment, right? Then we're talking about local exhaust fan, right? Local exhaust fan is just like a fan, but it can remove toxic from inside the building and take it out and bring fresh air inside, right? Same like the FSH, right, machine they use for building. But this is called the LEV. This is local exhaust ventilation. Local exhaust ventilation is the standard control measure for dealing with dust, vapor, and fumes generated a particular point. Enclosed may be totally gloves, particularly flames, right? Then movables like cup. Directional, then must be located close to the sources of contamination, and also secure the duct must safely carried contaminated away to an exhaust outlet. Inspection of hood and ducting must be carried out regularly using a visual check or a pressure gauge, right? Then we're talking about the dilution, vibration, ventilation. Dilution ventilation is simply operates by changing the air and also diluting the contamination or the concentration using an extraction fan. Limitation include not suitable for control of substance with high toxic, does not cope well with the sudden release of large quantity of contaminated, then does not work well for dust or where the contaminant is released at the point of source. Then dead areas may exist where high concentration of contaminated are allowed to accumulate, right? So this process is not accurate that much also, but it's like a big exhaust fan to remove the toxic air around. Then you have local exhaust fan also, right? So we're talking about respiratory protective equipment. Respiratory equipment also, protective equipment like these masks, they use like this one to protect yourself when you are breathing. The first aim is to always control hazardous substance. This safe practice or surgery, if not practical or entirely effective, a second aim will be to use the personal protective equipment, that is safe person strategy. This involves using a system that are worn by individual to reduce the possibility of contamination of harmful or toxic equipment. Like when you are using this PPP equipment, like masks or where you can breathe inside, right? So you cannot be affected. Then the use of this respiratory protective equipment will depend on the types of hazard, that is dust, corrosive or toxic substance or oxygen deficiency, right? The concentration levels and the wearing acceptability equipment include respirator. One is respirator and two is breathing apparatus. What is respirator? Respirator is designed to purify the air, to make the air clean by inhaling it through a filter which remove the contaminated or choice of type, which will depend on the nature of the substance and medium. This filter, it filters the dust, right, and absorb the gas or any vapor, any toxicity can absorb it at the max, and also the level of this protection needed, right? Then half max, right, and powder, it can clean the air. Then we're talking about breathing apparatus, which is the second one. You have respirator, you have the breathing apparatus. Breathing apparatus is the fresh air hose apparatus. It's comprised of airline apparatus, self-contained apparatus. What are the limitations of RPE? RPE mean respiratory protective equipment. What is the limitation, right, of this respiratory protective equipment? One is protection factors. Then it's feature of the equipment. It's uncomfortable to operate it, right? Then condition, right? Condition, it's maintenance, and also correct storage is also required of this equipment, right? Then another personal protective equipment like the gloves, gullets for use this chemical, biological and physical agents. You have to have gloves. Then overall, you have to wear overall. You have the overall in case of fire, or this toxic can only remain in the overall. It cannot go to your inner body, right? Then we're talking about the high protection, which your goggles or your glass, you have to have this one also. Then another one I'm going to talk about, personal hygienes, right? Personal hygienes and protection range, right? Like good basic welfare of facility or even showers for more hazardous environments, and not prepare or eating food in a workroom will help protect worker from contamination or vaccination may also be required, right? So also personal hygiene also can help. If you are working in a toxic area, don't eat your food or keep food in that toxic area. You should have certain place where you should keep your food, because your food can be contaminated because of the chemical or the explosion of chemical to your food, right? Then we're talking about health surveillance. Health surveillance surveillance and regularly health check help detect the adverse changes in the worker where there has been no possible exposure to hazardous substance. So there should be medical check, right, to help surveillance whether a person is being affected by toxic substance, right? So this is more necessary. Then further control. We are going to talk about further control of carcinogen and mutagen and asthmagen, right? Additional measure may also be required. Total enclosement, right? So control. Total enclosement means that when you have this chemical, you should have certain place you should put those chemical. Then prohibition of eating and drinking and smoking in that particular areas, right? So that particular area you should not eat or drink there because there are chemical there. Then regularly cleaning of the surface. They should always clean these areas where this carcinogen and mutagen and asthmagen where this chemical are. Then designation of possible contamination area, use a suitable sufficient warm sign. So sign should always be there that this dangerous place, this is combustic material. Then safe storage, handling and disposal. When you want to throw these chemicals also, they should have a special place that they should throw all of this chemical. You should know how to handle this one, which dustbin they're supposed to put them, right? Then I'm going to talk about specific agents. You have specific agents, then sources of material, then the route of entry the body, and main health effects, right? Like abnormal. Abnormal is a colorless gas, rapidly water soluble and also found in petrol or refined water, purify and also manufacture of fertilizers and drugs, right? Then what are the routes it can enter human body? In liquid form, right? Maybe splash on the skin of the body, can also be inhaled as a weapon. What are the main health effects? Severe irritation that lead to several or fatal burns, and also on ulceration when ulceration when on the skin or in the eye may also cause blindness. Weapon also can cause